The arrow screamed past his ear. So close he felt the fletching brush his skin. Oda Nobunaga didn't flinch. Around him, the world had become fire and iron. Smoke choked the valley floor. The clash of 10,000 blades filled the air like thunder that wouldn't stop. But Nobunaga stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on the enemy formation 200 yards ahead. A fortress of men that hadn't moved in 3 hours. His generals were screaming at him, "Retreat! Regroup!" This was madness. The Takeda cavalry had already shattered his left flank. His Ashigaru, peasant foot soldiers armed with little more than bamboo spears and desperate courage, were being cut down like wheat before the scythe. Blood turned the earth to mud. The screams of dying men mixed with the battle cries of samurai charging to their deaths. But Nobunaga smiled, because he could see something no one else could see. A pattern, a rhythm. The way the Takeda warriors moved, that ancient, unbreakable formation that had crushed every army for 200 years. The technique that had made the samurai cavalry of the Takeda clan the most feared force in all of Japan. And he was about to make it obsolete. This is year 1575, the Battle of Nagashino, a moment when warfare itself was about to be rewritten in blood and gunpowder. But to understand what Nobunaga saw, what he was about to unleash, you need to understand the technique he was facing. The fighting method that had dominated Japanese battlefields for centuries. The ancient samurai doctrine that seemed impossible to counter. It was called Shinogi Zukuri no Kokoro, the spirit of the ridged blade. But that's just poetry. What it really meant was something far more brutal, far more effective, and far more terrifying. Picture this. You're a foot soldier, 16 years old. You've been given a spear and 3 weeks of training. Now you're standing in a rice field turned battlefield, and you hear it before you see it. A sound like rolling thunder. The ground begins to shake. You look up. 40 mounted samurai are charging directly at you. Each rider is encased in armor, layered plates of lacquered steel and leather, designed over generations to deflect arrows, absorb impact, turn blades. Their horses are massive war beasts, bred for size and aggression. Each samurai carries a tachi, a curved longsword designed specifically for mounted combat. With a blade so sharp, it can cut through bamboo armor like silk. But the sword isn't even the primary weapon. In their right hands, they carry the yari, a spear 12 feet long with a razor-sharp tip. And they've trained since childhood in one specific technique. The mounted spear thrust, executed at full gallop. Speed plus weight plus precision. The math of death. Here's how it works. As the horse closes the distance, the samurai rises slightly in the stirrups, planting his weight through his legs into the horse's momentum. The spear, which has been held loosely, almost casually, suddenly snaps forward in a motion that's part thrust, part release. The entire kinetic energy of a charging warhorse focused into a single point of steel. You can't block it. Your wooden spear shaft snaps like kindling. You can't dodge it. The formation is too tight, your own allies pressing against your back. And you can't run, because the samurai behind the first line are already positioning for their strike, and behind them, another line, and another. This is the karabitachi, the repeated wave thrust. One line strikes, wheels away, and the next line is already upon you before you can recover. It's not a charge. It's a machine, a human threshing device that processes infantry into corpses. The Takeda clan perfected this technique over 200 years. Their founder, Takeda Shingen, was a military genius who understood something fundamental about medieval warfare. Cavalry wasn't just about shock, it was about sustained pressure. Most cavalry charges in history, European knights, Mongol horsemen, relied on the initial impact to break enemy formations. But the Takeda method was different. It was designed to keep coming. Wave after wave after wave, grinding down the enemy's will to fight until they broke and ran. And when they ran, the real killing began. Because the samurai weren't just warriors, they were hunters. The moment an enemy formation broke, the Takeda cavalry would pursue, cutting down fleeing soldiers with systematic efficiency. A routing army could lose 80% of its men in the pursuit, and the Takeda made sure everyone knew it. They took heads, displayed them, counted them, built towers of skulls outside conquered castles. The message was clear: face us and die slowly. Run from us and die quickly. Either way, you die. Takeda Shingen used this technique to conquer most of central Japan. He defeated armies 3 times his size. Other daimyo, feudal lords, tried everything to counter him. They built wooden palisades. The Takeda just circled around them. They dug trenches. The Takeda dismounted and crossed on foot, then remounted and continued the slaughter. They tried matching cavalry with cavalry, which just meant they died on horseback instead of on foot. Nothing worked. Because the technique wasn't just about the physical mechanics, it was about psychology. When you watched that first wave come at you, knowing what was going to happen, knowing you couldn't stop it, something broke inside you before the first spear even landed. The Takeda warriors could see it in their enemies' eyes. That moment when discipline gave way to animal terror. That's when they knew they'd already won. Takeda Shingen died in 1573, but his son, Takeda Katsuyori, inherited both the army and the technique. He was younger, more aggressive, and even more brutal. He believed the Takeda cavalry was invincible. Every battle seemed to prove him right, until he met Oda Nobunaga at Nagashino. Nobunaga was different from other warlords. He was innovative where they were traditional, ruthless where they were honorable, and he understood something that the other daimyo didn't. The age of the samurai was ending. Not because the samurai weren't skilled, they were the most highly trained warriors in the world, but because technology was about to make skill irrelevant. Nobunaga had guns, not just a few arquebuses for show, 3,000 of them. The Tanegashima, matchlock firearms introduced to Japan by Portuguese traders 30 years earlier. Most daimyo considered them curiosities, unreliable in rain, slow to reload, inaccurate beyond 50 yards, shameful weapons for dishonorable men. Nobunaga saw them differently. He saw mathematics. An ashigaru needed years to become skilled with a bow. He needed decades to match a mounted samurai with a sword. But you could teach a farmer to fire a gun in a week. And while a single gun wasn't particularly dangerous, 3,000 guns firing in sequence was something else entirely. It was coordinated lethality on an industrial scale. But there was a problem. Loading a matchlock took time. 45 seconds minimum for a trained soldier. During those 45 seconds, the samurai cavalry could close 200 yards and be upon you. Once they reached your line, the guns were useless. You couldn't reload, couldn't aim, couldn't shoot. The Takeda cavalry would crash into your position and tear you apart. Every military advisor told Nobunaga the same thing. You can't use guns against Takeda cavalry. They move too fast. They're too disciplined. By the time your gunners fire one volley, the samurai will already be in your formation. And then it's swords against useless iron tubes. Nobunaga listened, smiled. and told his advisors they were thinking about the problem wrong. The night before the Battle of Nagashino, Nobunaga gathered his gunners. These weren't samurai. They were farmers, merchants, even former criminals. The lowest ranks of society, given weapons, and told they were going to face the legendary Takeda cavalry. They were terrified. Nobunaga stood in front of them in the firelight. He didn't give a rousing speech about honor or glory. He gave them geometry. "They will charge in lines," he said. 3 lines, 50 yards apart. The first line will thrust, wheel away, and the second line will already be closing. This is how they've won every battle for 200 years. He let that sink in. Let them picture it. But here's what they don't understand, Nobunaga continued. Speed is only an advantage if you reach your enemy. And you're going to make sure they never do. He'd spent the previous day building wooden palisades along the riverbank, a defensive barrier. But these weren't normal palisades. They weren't tall walls meant to be defended. They were low barriers, chest height, with horizontal beams spaced exactly 4 feet apart. Just wide enough for a gun barrel to rest on. Just low enough to aim down the barrel. Just stable enough to fire, reload, and fire again without moving. And here's the innovation, the technique that no one had thought of before. Nobunaga divided his 3,000 gunners into 3 sections. Section 1 fires. While they reload, Section 2 fires. While Section 2 reloads, Section 3 fires. By the time Section 3 finishes, Section 1 is loaded again. Rotating fire, continuous volley. It meant the Takeda cavalry would never face a moment when the guns weren't firing. Every second, somewhere along that line, 100 guns would roar. And the samurai, charging across open ground, would have nowhere to hide. The morning of the battle, Takeda Katsuyori saw Nobunaga's position and laughed. "He's trapped himself against the river," Katsuyori said to his generals. "Wooden walls and peasants with guns. We'll ride through them like paper." He was right to be confident. He had 12,000 men. Nobunaga had 8,000. Katsuyori had the finest cavalry in Japan. Nobunaga had farmers holding matchlocks. And most importantly, Katsuyori had history on his side. The Takeda cavalry had never lost. At dawn, Katsuyori gave the order. The first wave, 50 mounted samurai in full armor, began their charge. They were 200 yards out when the first volley hit them. The sound was like the sky tearing open. 100 guns firing simultaneously, the smoke erupting in a gray wall along Nobunaga's line. The effect was catastrophic. Horses screamed and collapsed. Samurai were thrown from their saddles, their armor punctured by lead balls moving at subsonic speeds. Men who'd spent their entire lives training to deflect sword strikes found themselves helpless against a weapon that didn't care about technique or skill. But the samurai didn't break. They were too disciplined, too committed. The survivors kept charging. 45 seconds, Katsuyori thought. In 45 seconds, they'll reach the barricades and it's over. But then, the second volley fired. The gunners hadn't reloaded. A completely different section had stepped forward. Another 100 guns. Another wave of death. Katsuyori felt his blood go cold. The samurai were 100 yards out now. Still charging. Still dying. Horses collapsing mid-gallop, sending their riders tumbling across the ground in 70 pounds of steel armor. The third volley. This time, there were no survivors from the first wave. Every samurai who'd started that charge was either dead or dying on the ground. Their horses thrashed in the mud. Their armor gleamed red. And still, the guns kept firing. Katsuyori sent in the second wave, then the third, then the fourth. Each time, the same result. Samurai would charge with absolute courage, absolute discipline, and die before they ever reached Nobunaga's line. The rotating volleys never stopped. Every 7 seconds, another 100 guns. The sound was continuous, a mechanical roar that drowned out screams, battle cries, even thought. After 2 hours, the Takeda clan had lost 3,000 men. The ground between the armies was carpeted with bodies, and not a single samurai had reached the barricades. Katsuyori finally understood. The ancient technique, the wave thrust, the mounted charge, the 200-year tradition of Takeda cavalry dominance had become obsolete in a single morning. Because Nobunaga hadn't just brought guns to a sword fight, he'd brought systems, coordination, discipline, the willingness to sacrifice traditional honor for brutal effectiveness. The Takeda cavalry finally broke. They retreated across the field, and Nobunaga's forces pursued. By nightfall, the Takeda clan had been shattered. Katsuyori would die 3 years later, committing ritual suicide after his final defeat. The technique that had dominated Japanese warfare for centuries was finished. But here's the thing historians rarely mention. The samurai at Nagashino weren't cowards. They weren't incompetent. They were perfect practitioners of their art. Every thrust was textbook. Every charge executed with flawless discipline. They did everything right according to 200 years of accumulated wisdom. And it didn't matter, because Nobunaga understood something deeper than technique. He understood that warfare isn't really about who has the best warriors. It's about who can adapt fastest, who can look at the same battlefield everyone else sees and imagine something different, who can take weapons the rest of the world dismisses as dishonorable or unreliable and turn them into engines of systematic destruction. The Takeda cavalry had one technique that no army could counter, until someone built an army that didn't need to counter it. That simply stood still and erased it from existence. After the battle, Nobunaga walked among the bodies. Thousands of dead samurai, each one wearing armor that represented decades of craftsmanship, carrying swords that were family heirlooms, trained in techniques passed from father to son for generations. All of it rendered meaningless by farmers with guns. They say he didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. He just stood there, looking at what he'd done, and understood that he'd witnessed the end of an era. The samurai would continue for another 300 years in Japan, but they would never again be the unstoppable force they'd once been. Nagashino proved that courage and skill and tradition could all be erased by someone willing to think differently about killing. Today, Nagashino is a quiet valley. Rice fields grow where men once died. There's a small memorial, a stone marker that lists the names of the Takeda samurai who fell. Tourists take pictures. School children visit on field trips. But if you stand there in the early morning, when the mist still clings to the ground, you can almost hear it. That sound that no samurai technique could counter. The sound that changed warfare forever. The rolling thunder of 3,000 guns firing in perfect mechanical rhythm. Again, and again, and again, until there was nothing left to charge. And if you want more breakdowns of history's most brilliant and brutal strategies, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching.